Hey YouTube, PoopsLag here, and this is TurboFat, an open source puzzle game I'm making in Godot. Source code's linked below if you want to see how it all works. But this month, I've been converting the whole game from Godot 3 to Godot 4, which is a major version upgrade. It has things like a new renderer, bug fixes, performance improvements, but most importantly, it implements something called canvas groups, which I really need for my little 2D game to be rendered correctly. So I've already converted Frog Finder last month, which is a much smaller game, so this is going to be sort of the same process, just a lot more stuff. So let me show you what I did so far. So when I'm working on like a huge task like this, I like to come up with a list ahead of time of all the steps and milestones and make them as measurable as possible. Things like the whole game compiles, I can run the game, I can export the game, play it for other people. I like doing this ahead of time because it's nice to know like I'm about a third of the way through and I got this stuff left, and oh yeah, I haven't looked at Android yet, but I got to remember to do that. So Godot 4 will auto-convert your code from Godot 3, but it doesn't do a perfect job. You'll need to clean up some stuff. First of all, any lines beginning with a period, it's going to assume is a super call, but if that's not the case, you'll have to fix that. The signal calls it introduces are a little bit clunky and verbose, and you can clean those up as well. It'll introduce some nonsensical packed string array calls, which don't compile, and you can rearrange those so they do. And any export statements, if you use strongly typed exports, it's just going to leave those in, and that doesn't compile anymore, so you can clean that up as well. So I got a bunch of other compilation errors. These weren't anything the converter did wrong. It was just changes in Godot's APIs and in GDScript itself. Like you can't have dictionaries and arrays passed directly into conditionals. Now you have to say is empty. You can't override methods like tilemap clear. You can't have your own implementation of those. So now I have like clear puzzle, which I call instead, and it does the same thing. You can't have a field and a signal with the same name anymore. So for example, I used to have tutorial section finish, which is a Boolean with a corresponding signal, which would get emitted when the Boolean was set. And now you just have to call those something else. Tilemaps APIs have changed a lot. They have things like layers and a million new features, but that means a lot of their methods and parameters have changed. And if you're using anything like vector2s and rect2s with them, now those have integer counterparts. And lastly, enums used to be just passed around as ints, but now enums are actual types you can just pass around as themselves. But if you're doing any clever int magic, like I was using -1 as a placeholder to mean like this enum has no value yet, you can't do that kind of stuff anymore. So I folded that into the enum itself with like an enum none value. So I caught a few other problems and I was trying to make all my unit tests pass. Colors now use RGBA instead of ARGB. So all my stored player data that people have in their save games, that's all going to have to be converted at some point. All the button names changed too for things like gamepad buttons, like D-pad now has a hyphen, which is super trivial, but the conversion logic for translating that to Spanish and back stuff, it has to be exactly, the text has to match. So I went ahead and updated the localization data as well. So at this point, the game sort of launched. It just didn't look right or do anything good. I knew one problem with it was that all the tweens were busted. They hadn't been converted to Godot 4's new scene tree tweens. And I'd already done that fix last year, so I just dusted it off. I remember the reason why I shelved it was because it introduced a memory leak. And I thought there was a problem in Godot, but it's actually a problem because my game's cleanup code was tied to this tween.finish signal, and that signal's just busted. It never fires. So I just rewrited the code to instead key off of a callback that I added, and then it works fine. So next I started testing a bunch of my game's widgets in isolation looking for bugs. For example, I noticed the anti-aliasing on these lines is something I used to set in code, and now that's a project-wide setting. The code doesn't work anymore. Fonts similarly used to have a font size attribute on the font, and that's moved now over into the label. So I had to rewrite some of my code for that stuff. Shaders and modulate used to sort of work together. We could have a node that said, here's my special rendering code, and a modulate property says I should be mostly transparent. And now if you want that to work, you need to fold that modulate property into the shader itself because shaders don't recognize modulate. And lastly, I noticed just like little demos and stuff I'd run now took like 15 seconds or so to launch. And that's just the Vulkan renderer. It's pretty slow to start up. So for development, I'm now using the compatibility renderer instead. So I knew puzzles, creatures, and the overworld were all going to be really complex to fix because they just have a lot of moving parts, but I just tried to tackle puzzles first, and the scene would just crash when I tried to open it. And this is because of a bug in Godot 4 with atlas regions, where if they're larger than the corresponding texture, that just now crashes the engine. So I fixed that by, in some cases, making the atlas regions smaller so they fit in the texture. In some cases, I just had to make the textures bigger. So with that, Godot 4 wasn't crashing from my tile sets, but it was still doing some horrible stuff. Like I might have 200 little tiles defined in a tile set, like here's my strawberry tile and my grape tile. Godot 4 splits all those tiles up into 200 smaller tiles also. So now I have like, here's the upper left corner of my strawberry, and then it flips and rotates them all to make alternates. And so I'll end up with like 250,000 little tiny pixel alternates for this tile set that I would never want. You can't remove those unless you right-click each one and delete them. And that's the first thing the Discord recommended is like, what if you just write an editor script and it'll go through all those alternates and delete them. But even the editor script just hangs if you try to run it because it's just too much to do. Firebelly Games had a better workaround, which is you take all that auto-converted tile map and Tileset and just throw it in the garbage and start over. I think that's probably the recommended approach at this time, but I did come up with one last idea, which is I took all the atlases and I shrank them down to like 16 by 16 pixels, so they're super tiny, and Godot will only try to create one tile from it, and it'll still create all those alternates. But then I can run that script the Discord gave me to delete all the alternates, and that works okay because it's a smaller number. It's not trying to do 250,000 things at once. And then that works, and you can see the puzzle tile maps, they work okay. I still got a lot more of this stuff to do, but at least there's a way forward with these cursed Godot 4 tile maps. So that's the status after May. We got some of the game converted. It all compiles. It sort of starts up. It just doesn't do anything good or look great. All the tests pass though. And the tile map stuff is getting there. The puzzles are almost there, so I think they'll probably be converted by the end of next month. The creatures and the overworld stuff I haven't touched yet, and that might take some doing. We'll see. And I'm optimistic about the canvas groups because I did implement some of that in Frog Finder. You can see these little shadows behind all the cards in Frog Finder. Those are done with canvas groups, and I think they look great. So really excited about Godot 4. It'll get there eventually. Just be patient with me. If you want to try the game in the meantime, it is still playable. You can see this is on Godot 3 though, but it's up on itch.io if you want to try it out. If you want to look at the source code, it's all there too. But yeah, come try out my game and let me know what you think. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next month.